Okay, so this video is going to talk about some more advanced text editing options. I'm going to start with talking about table of contents and showing you a couple examples and then talking how to make it, and then I'll get into additional items. I might recommend, because the document you've set up so far hopefully will become the document that is your cookbook, that you use that one to demonstrate these skills. We can actually put the table of contents where the table of contents should go, and then some of the other skills you may or may not want to use, but I'm going to show them to you anyway, and if you can just demonstrate in the document that you can do it, turn in the document, and then if you don't want to use them, you can always go back and delete it. But at least to show you, everyone should have a table of contents. So there's a couple of options. Number one, we can start with the number and then have the chapter name next to it. The other option we can do is to use what's called a leader. Both of these are using tabs, but this one specifically uses a tab to get the number over here when there's actual numbers. This was a document that was in progress. And then the leader actually puts in all these dots so that it lines up nice and evenly, and you have sort of this perfect arrangement of items. And the leader can be used for more than just the purpose of table of contents. If you've ever seen forms, that's a good use for it. There's a variety of options, but we're going to get started and look at this. So I'm going to go back to my actual cookbook file that I started with you guys previously. And I'm not going to do it on the cover page. I'm going to do it on page 3, because the page 1 is the cover, page 2 is the inside of the cover. That would actually be, if I was making this cookbook, you'll learn how to make a pattern and a gradient this week. One of those two would probably go in here. Most likely for me, the pattern. I really love a pattern page on the inside cover, but you don't have to. That's just a personal preference. Again, this is your cookbook. How you put in the elements that are required is up to you. So I want you to keep that in mind. So to start with, I'm just going to take and draw a text box. This is probably not where I want to leave this, but for right now, I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to type table of contents and spell it correctly. It's defaulting to the previous font. I can play with that later. I'm going to hit return, and I'm just going to say recipe 1. I'm going to type a couple recipe 2. It's actually applying some of my styles. Recipe 3. I don't know how many recipes you'll actually be able to fit in the book. That's going to depend on what kind of food and how you arrange the assignments. I'm gonna say you have to have a minimum though of, I believe it's 8 or 10, so I'll put 10 in, just, oops, let's not skip numbers, 10 in just for purposes of showing you this. And you should put the actual names of the recipes when you make the cookbook. For right now, you can do exactly what I'm doing, because this is all editable. You can come back later and put in your actual recipe names. So now we can do one of two things. We can put the number here and do the first one, or the number after. So I'm going to start with the first one, and I'm going to put in, I'm going to say this is on page 4. I'm just going to go page 6, page 8. Maybe this one then is page 9. Actually, let's just do page 10. I'm going to do the cake ones, thinking that they're going to have images with them. And then because I'll actually use, as I build this, I will use the frosting then without. So this one will say 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. So actually that works out perfectly. The next thing I'm going to do to get ready for doing this is I'm going to put a tab between the number and the word. It's not really doing anything because of how the tabs are set up. I'm going to keep going down this. Okay. So now I'm also going to put a tab before the number. So you could use this for the ingredients. I don't remember how much I got into with that previously, but you could use this concept for the ingredients also. This first one, the second option I wouldn't use for the ingredients. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight, and then I'm going to open the tab panel. It's Command Shift and T, or Control Shift and T if you're on a PC, or for those that aren't comfortable with the hand commands, come up to tabs and select that, and that will open this panel. Alright, so this actually must be feeding off the ingredients, so I'm going to temporarily delete these so that you don't see that. So I think this has by default loaded in the ingredients where I put this in place, but just so you know how to do this. So number one, I want to set up a tab and determine to start with, I'm right aligning the numbers, and I want to leave myself, so when I start a project like this, I usually put the lowest number and the highest number in, so I know what the least amount of space I need is and what the most amount of space I need is. And so here, we're only going to get into double digits, so I can adjust accordingly for the double digits. When you're doing like the ingredients, pick the most complicated number, so probably a number with a fraction. And if you're including the word after the number, so like teaspoons, cups, you'd want to factor that in. And then we want to do the other one. We're going to actually change this to a left justified, and these are going to line up. I would probably either insert returns or else increase my leading, so you get a little more space. Space is out nice. This is a very small, compact. Obviously, once you put in recipe names, it may be longer, but that shows you how to set that up. So the other option is the leader. I'm going to go back. I'm just going to undo. I'm using Command Z to undo. I'm going to get rid of those tabs also, because I'm not going to need the one tab this time. I'm just going to move this over here, and I'm going to hit tab and then put the number in place. Obviously, if you wanted this option, you would start by doing this, but because I'm trying to show you both options, we're going to do this separately. Alright, so we're going to keep coming and tabbing, moving the number, and so I'm putting the tab in place because I'm going to set that up in just a second. Oops. This is the fun when I'm talking and trying to do this. So it's not going to it's going to use a default tab to start with because we're past the ones that kind of came with the style. I would start with no style just to make sure that you're not trying to import something that doesn't work for this purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight these again, and I'm going to delete those existing styles. Again, you hopefully don't have an existing style in place. InDesign, like many other Adobe programs, will often hold on to the last setting for better or for worse. It's trying to help you, but often it's just a nuisance. So now I'm going to put in the leader tab. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to drag this as close to that edge as I can get. I want to change it back to right justified again. And then for the leader, I'm going to go ahead and put in up here dots. And I'm going to hit return, and that's going to put in dots. I could again space this out so it's a little easier to read. It helps with table of contents to give yourself some space. Just makes it easier to follow it if you don't have a ton. The other thing with the leader, so if you don't want the dot, you can use underlines are used. That's how you use that sometimes with forms when you do like name, address. That's how we get a nice clean line. Technically you can use anything, so I could put in the letter S if I wanted to. I don't know why you'd want to, but that's an option for you. So I'm going to change this back to dots so we actually have what I would say is a more typical table of contents. Could you do this also, this technique, without the dots? Yes, I probably wouldn't put the number as far from the recipe then. All right, we're going to get into some other techniques. I'm going to go down to where I have this one, my recipe. Let's say I wanted an underline under this text between the title and this piece. So I would want to go ahead and I'm just going to highlight buttercream for this purpose. I'm going to go ahead to paragraph, and anything I do in these next couple steps can actually be turned into paragraph or character styles. So if you haven't gotten very far in your document and you decide you might want to add these, it's something to consider. So I've highlighted this piece, and I'm going to go ahead and come over here, and I'm going to select paragraph rules for right now. I really recommend, if preview isn't by default on, that you do that. You have the option of above or below. Above is helpful, like for example, you want to make a signature line. Sometimes too, though, you'll see people do above and below as a way to set off a heading, so that's an option too if you wanted a line above here and below here. For right now, I'm going to do below. I like that as a way to distinguish between the recipe and everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and click rule on. By default, it typically goes to 1 point solid line text color. I'm going to say instead of the text color, I just want to put it to black. I also don't want this quite so tight, so I'm going to use this offset. It's going to give me a little space, kind of put the line between the next set of text and the title. I might decide, like, I can make it a thicker line, for example. Doesn't really work for me in the font. I might actually make it a slightly thinner line. You can choose, just like any other line in InDesign, you can choose these options. So if you wanted dots instead, which are harder to see at half point, so let me make this bigger, you can see that. But there's a whole bunch of different lines. Usually anything but solid tends to be better at least a point, if not bigger. And then you can, if you do a dotted line, you can you could have put a color in between. I'm going to set this back to solid. Then you have the option of the column. So this is going the whole way across with our text box, or we can say text, and then it only goes under there. In this case, I want the whole column because it's a title. I want it to feel like that. You also have the ability to indent, so you could make this line smaller. We could go I'm trying to get it so you can see it. Oop, went too far. That's why we shouldn't. Okay, so I could go all the way over there. Sorry, I did it in the extreme. And I can also go negative here, and then it goes the other way. So there are reasons for either one, depending on what you want to do. Oops. And remember that when you press enter, that's going to finish it. Same with right indent. You can indent it in either way. That's up to you. Those are all options. And I did it again. This is what happens when I type and talk. So those are the general options. We could also do it above. So if we wanted another line above this, I could have highlighted and had both. But I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And then if I wanted to make this into a paragraph style, so I'm going to do new paragraph style. We're going to base it on the original. We're going to call it title with line. Maybe you're mixing them for some reason. But if I come here to paragraph rules, you'll now see all those settings are addable to this particular style if I want to use that instead. So that is definitely an option for you. Another option you could do, let's say you wanted this section here, you didn't want it part of the main recipe, you want it in its own like color box, and you want to set that up. So I could draw the color box. I could also do it in here, but in this case maybe I want it separate, so I'm going to draw a box to use. I'm going to make it this light blue color I've been using. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this text out. And maybe I'm even going to delete some space. I can play with this later. And then I'm going to use this text tool and I'm going to come over the box and I'm going to click on it. So now when I paste this text, so I did Command X or Control X to cut. And now I'm using Command V or Control V to paste. So I've put this in here. I might decide, for example, to make the type white because maybe that's what I want. I might also actually make the style properly and use the bold. So it's up to you how you want to format it and see what makes sense. But the important part is learning how to space it here. So what I can do is I can come and control click or right click depending on whether you've set that up on your Mac or whether you're on a PC. I can go to text frame options, and here's where I can inset spacing. So I never want with a text box it to be right to the edges. Like, that's no go for me. I'm previewing again. I might actually just play with this, and then I can always make the box bigger later, but I think that's a good amount of spacing. I also have a couple abilities to adjust alignment, so I can do to the top, which is the default, bottom, center, and justify. Basically justify evenly spaces, which won't do much here. Center would center. I'm actually going to leave it at that. And then we're going to go ahead and set it. But this is how you can attach text to a box and then start to customize it. I'll talk separately about using columns and column rules, but this allows you to see this. Helpful to click preview if you're not sure what you're doing. Go ahead and say okay. And you'll notice more of how it works as I start to do that. So that now centered it in this box. And I can play with my settings until I get what I want, playing with my template. I wasn't actually on my bar. And then, you know, maybe I set it off to the one side, or I set it over here and wrap around it. It's up to you where you place it, but it's an option for layout. So you don't have to just keep with like a bunch of text. You could even do it with your ingredients. I probably wouldn't do it with my directions, but for like a piece you might want to call out like this is actually a really easy technique that makes sense. I could put a text wrap around this, which would then wrap that. Actually, I don't remember if I talked about that before, but let's do that. So I have text wrap as part of my like docked panels because I use it all the time. If you don't see text wrap, you can come under window and select text wrap. I'm going to go ahead and select this one, wrap around object shape. And then I can even set how much. So like, I don't want it too close to this. But I also don't want it too far, so that little line is pushing the text away. I'm probably going to take it down one. That's good. And you can wrap it around any kind of shape. You can even get really tricky. I have a file that I really customized around it. Actually, let's just show you really quick while we are on here. I just want to show you this. It's yelling at me because I moved a linked file. But I was helping out with North Platte yearbook. They're having some issues. So here, I imported a file from Photoshop, and we can talk about this when we get to Photoshop. And then I put in a custom, like I made a path in there that allowed me to cut him out from the background. Again, normally I would spend more time. This was just to rough show them something. And then in InDesign, I actually can select to wrap around this shape based on that path, and then when I applied the text wrap, it follows the shape of this path and allows me to work with that. Same with this one, a little harder to see, but this actually has a custom shape, and if we look here, like it has a custom wrap around it too. So that's an option for you, is that you are able to use, like I could use this weird shape and it could wrap around that. So that's an option for you. The next thing I wanted to talk about, instead of the line, if you didn't want to use that up here, let's say instead of that, and I'm just going to delete it real quick. And to delete it, if you decide you don't want it, you just turn it off. Alright, so let's say I wanted to put this in a box, like I want a box for my opening part. I can come here under, I'm in the paragraph window again, the little lines, paragraph borders and shading. Here's where I could add a border. So this actually highlights around this. Let me move this a little bit off so you can see. It's putting a border on all sides by default. You could, if you wanted to, for some reason, only have like the top and bottom, but I would just use a paragraph rule then. Or maybe you just leave off the top. You can unclick the lock, and then I could say like 0 point for the top. So the top goes away, but the rest of them are there. So again, you can customize pretty well. I'm going to put it back to 1 point. Same, you can use any kind of line. We can use any kind of color. So maybe, yeah, I'm going to use black. You can play with the tint, which is how dark the color is, whether you want it to be white or 100% black. You can also do corner size and decide whether it's square. You can do this fancy corner, bevel, inset, rounded. So it rounds the edges a little bit. Again, making sure preview while you're learning. And then you can do an offset, so that actually spaces it out for you. It won't move your text down, so you may have to go back and adjust that, but it's an option to put this in here. And put this sort of border around something. You could have done that too for this little like details box. Maybe you use a border instead of a color. Could you just have done what I did in the last step? Yes, that's an option. But this is another way to customize your text. This one you can use in line with the text, so with the styles a little easier. So if you wanted to keep this one text box, this is a better option to put an outline, versus if I'm using this blue, I'm probably using a separate one. You also can do shading, which just kind of puts like a highlight, like a highlighter to it. I would say there's probably a lot of uses, but it just depends on what you're doing as to whether that makes sense. Again, you can edit the corners, so you can make it rounded. You could do the same offset, and then it looks like it's basically doing the equivalent of what we could do with a regular shape. So that's an option. I'm just going to turn that off, and we'll leave the line there. You don't need to apply these to your text, but I want to see that you could actually do these skills. So show me an example of the rule, show me an example of this box, and show me an example of the border, and then this one, as well as the table of contents. The last one I'm just going to show you generally, but you could use it with your recipes, is the ability to add multiple columns to one text box. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw a text box for reference, and I'm going to change my font to 10 point, and let's just use Helvetica New Regular Thin, I don't know, Roman works, because I want more text. So I'm going to go ahead to type and just do fill with placeholder text for right now. Again, it's defaulting to the style, which is slightly annoying. Again, I will select this, and as I did earlier, control click or right click to text frame options. And then I can come up here to columns, and I can set the number of columns I want. So let's say I want to do 3, because maybe that works. I could do 2. I can also really like customize. This is a fixed number, but you can do fixed width, flexible width. So like flexible width, you could set a percentage for them, things like that. I'm going to go back to fixed. I can decide my gutter. This is actually matching my gutter nicely right now. Another thing you can do here is column rules. So you can click insert column rules, and then it will actually put a rule between your columns. So there's benefits to that too. You can decide on the length. By default, it'll go the whole way, but you can decide you only want it so long. You can do an offset. I would actually, in this case, with this font, make the line thinner. You can change the color if you want a different color. You can also, again, you have all the line options. So there, you potentially could make use of this. You can click OK. Again, this is something that you can add to your paragraph styles. So if I copy this just to show you, do new paragraph style. I want to come. I have to remember where this is. I don't do this as much. I like my columns separately, but there are a lot of people who do not. Span column, single column. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done this one to remember where it is, but it is in here. Let me just quickly click through them all. Paragraph shading, keep options, hyphenation. I don't remember where it is. Maybe it's under basic? No? Anyway, it is in here somewhere. I'm sorry I can't remember where it is right now. I know it's in here though. Anyway, but yeah, so you could also set that up for your reference to this too. I'm gonna hit cancel, and so that's an option. But you could use this if you want, like by defaulting this, maybe you automatically have ingredients in one column and directions in another column. Like, you can get as complicated or as simple with this as you want. Yeah, and I believe we talked though, like with the ingredients and the directions, all I'm doing is using tabs to set that up. That's another more customized formatting. But I just want to see you can demonstrate these basic skills in the file you turn in. Whether you use them in the final cookbook is up to you. I just want to know that you understand how to do this. But all of this are tools that just make life a little easier. There are other ones I won't get into right now that get even more complicated. Like, the reason we use InDesign for something like a book is the level of control we have and the level of customization we can do. We can even customize hyphenation. We can customize keep rules as to how you keep words together. Like, there's so many options, but this is just to get you started and some really, I think, useful layout tools that I never learned in school, and when I learned on the job was like, oh my god, where has this been? So this will get you started with some more advanced editing options that you can think about, remembering that this week you do need to put your cookbook together, but this will help give you more tools to do that.